Okay, so 43 minutes. Okay. 22 points, 10 assists. Granted, all in a losing effort for Trae Young on Wednesday night in the play-in. Losing's actually putting it pretty mildly. The Hawks got blasted by the Bulls. Like this was never close. But Trae Young has some time on his hands. The Spurs are in need of a ball handler, an experienced ball handler, an all-star ball handler. Trae Young kind of checks those boxes.
No. Trae Young has been the sexy talk about who could be there as a guard in a trade since the All-Star break. Maybe before the All-Star break, but he and Wemby seem to be cozy during the All-Star break, and I think that has a lot of fans dreaming of what could be. I don't see it happening. Atlanta wants a whole lot in return. I don't see the Spurs paying that kind of price, and I do think there are better options. When you hear Greg Popovich, RJ, talk about not skipping steps, and you try to figure out what that means, and you read a quote in the Express News and an article written by Mike Finger where he quotes Brian Wright as saying the Spurs are going to be strategically aggressive. That doesn't mean Trae Young. I don't want, as much as I want the Spurs to accelerate the rebuild, I don't want another season anywhere close to what we had this past year. I also don't want them going out and just making the first big deal that shows up on the table. Like Atlanta calls and says, all right, we're out. You guys want Trae? We'll send them right over. Give us this haul in return. I just don't see that happening. And that's not really the Spurs way, and I think there are other options. I do expect the Spurs to be, and I like the term strategically aggressive because we don't really know what that means. I mean, which means they're going to dip their toe in the water, and if all the stars align and it's the right price, then they'll get a deal. I mean, I do think we'll get some shooters that are going to come in free agency, but maybe not the biggest superstars that are out there, but some quality free agents that will come. I do expect them to make some sort of trade with it because everybody keeps reporting about the eye on the 25 draft. That Topic kid in the draft that seems to be linked a lot to San Antonio seems like he'd be a good fit. Everything there points to, yeah, that guy looks like a Spur. And my only concern on him, and I know nothing about him other than what I've read, he's injury prone. He's been injury prone as a teenager playing with men over there in the European leagues.
I think everything that you said is fair and rational and measured, cautious, maybe a little too cautious. But I understand wanting to be cautious, right? Like, because we're carrying something very, very special and very precarious here. But let me just pose a hypothetical. Forget my opinion on Trae Young, because we've all talked, and Wemby himself has said, yeah, I mean, he's been humble about it, but like, yeah, I'm kind of involved. If Wemby wanted Trae Young, does that change your mind? If Wemby said, that's what I want, just live in that hypothetical for a moment. Is that opinion, his opinion, enough to say, you know what? I know I just said everything that I just did, but we go with you. You said yes. It's your seal of approval. That's what you want. So be it.
I think the answer is still no, to be quite honest. Partly because I've been around the Spurs organization too long. I believe that they will consult with Wemby on what he would like. But I don't know that Wemby would demand, get me this guy or nothing. And
yeah.
But again, I think now if the price was a little bit different, I think that's a game changer, right? But at the same time, to answer your question with yes or no, which is what you asked, I would say no. If he said, hey, go get me Trae Young, they're not going to say, all right, man, we're going to do everything we can and overpay and do all this kind of stuff. I just don't see that happening. At the same time, I do think Wemby's involvement will be crucial, and he will be a part of the discussion, but so will Pop, RC, the coaching staff, the analytics dudes, the doctors. All of that is going to factor in to what the Spurs do this offseason. But I don't know that he would demand that being the case. And if he did, I don't know if they would say, well, okay. And I'll use the example Mike Finger used in the San Antonio Express News. Look at Dallas a few years ago. Luka was a rookie.
Right.
They went and they traded for Porzingis, and that was the best they could do at the time. It's a superstar. We're going to pair him, and we're going to go win titles. And it exploded. I don't see the Spurs making that same kind of mistake, and I've been saying that for a while. But I appreciate the example that Finger used in his article, and I think Trae Young would fall into the Porzingis type of equation with, especially just watching last night. If you are in on Trae Young and you watch last night's game, you've got a foot halfway out the door at this point this morning. He was not good last night, and he was not Spurs-like last night. And the turnovers with him and Wemby would be awful.
So the Porzingis example that you mentioned is sound, especially because, I mean, if you look at Porzingis specifically and individually, it wasn't a matter of like, oh, you traded for a player that wasn't great. The situation wasn't great. Like that was the whole kind of point of the exercise, right? You look at Porzingis now and you're like, man, that dude would be awesome. And what he pointed out in the article you're talking about is not only did the Porzingis experiment not work out for Dallas, but the whole process kind of lost them Jalen Brunson. I mean, don't you think the Mavs are thinking like, man, that would be nice to have Jalen Brunson around right now. Now, granted, I think what's mentioned or should be mentioned, and it was, the Mavs still figured it out and still brought in Kyrie. They kept swinging, and we'll see obviously how that winds up working out for them, here this year in the playoffs. But they landed on their feet is kind of the point. Like if you keep, I don't mean to keep coming back to this, but it's very Philadelphia Eagles like, right? Like very like, okay, how do we think ourselves out of this? How do we keep going? How do we keep buying? And some of that is continually pushing the credit down the road. But if you can get out of pickles, then that's the mark of aggressive teams that are forward thinking. And I'm not saying the Spurs aren't that, but slow playing, it doesn't have 100% track record of success. That's all.
No,
and fine.
And I don't want to slow play. Last year, and I see Josh on the YouTube channel saying, remember last year they didn't want to overpay for Dame Lillard. I wanted Dame Lillard last year. And I thought, man, we're adding Wemby. Let's get Dame. Let's go. The Spurs wanted to see what Wemby needed as a pro. What were they really getting? And Wemby exceeded the extremely high expectations. He is ready to win now. Coming in, rookie year, if you wanted to be cautious, which the Spurs took that approach by just adding Wemby to what they basically had the year before to see what they really had. And, draft night, maybe the first couple of weeks of training camp, they're getting to know him. They might have thought, well, he's 19. It might take 2 or 3 years before he is really ready to win. After what we saw this rookie year for him, he's ready to win now. We don't need to wait 3 years.
Well, and so for me, Trae Young is about the carrot. I really care. Trae Young is the name that I've assigned to it. And to be clear, my chips are in the Trae Young basket. That's the player I want the most. But I can be convinced, I can jump on your bandwagon if you've got one. If there's not another all-star on this team, or a all-star, because Wemby wasn't one, you know what I'm saying? Like if there's not an all-star on this roster by the beginning of next season, then something has gone awry. Like you cannot slow play. You can't. You're right. I mean, I still think it was a little bit, shy to say, let's just see how he is. Let's see if all these rumors are true. But there was some wisdom behind that. And fine. Okay. You did that. You burned a year. He completely and totally over-delivered on all expectations. You have to start running. You have to. You cannot sit by and just chill and be on cruise control here. You have to be way more aggressive. Maybe that aggression isn't best channeled with the specific player that Trae Young is or isn't at this point in his career, but you have to go get him some help. You cannot just run this back with Keldon and Devin and Jeremy and act like everything's going to be fine and everything's going to be copacetic because you want it to be. I
will be, I'd like to say a lot of words that I can't say on radio. If the Spurs run it back with this group next year and with whatever they do in the draft, I don't expect that. I don't necessarily know, though, that I have to have in Sharpie, they have to get an all-star on this team. You can build a team and develop them into all-stars. It might be an aging veteran. I mean, look at last year's all-star roster, and one, who's available, and two, which one of those guys that were an all-star last year that you say we have to go get that is going to be a good fit with Wemby and this Spurs team. I wouldn't be surprised, to be quite honest with you, RJ. And while you're stuck on Trae Young, give me a list of 4 or 5 other guys that you are taking Trae Young over, or who would you rather have besides Trae Young? But I wouldn't be surprised if 50, 60, 75% of this roster is turned over. When I look at this Spurs team, and I like the way Devin Vassell played February on. I don't like what Devin Vassell did in the calendar year 2023 with Wemby. Once Devin realized, all right, this Wemby guy's pretty good, he's the number one option, Devin Vassell's game changed. But as Devin Vassell, and it took him a long time to expect he was no longer option one, if you bring in an all-star, how long will it take Devin to realize he's option 3? Kevin, when I look at the idea, okay, you got Vassell, and I want him. I don't want him gone. Don't as I say this, I want to be clear.
He's earned a place. I'm with you.
But if I'm also making a trade, unless I'm dealing with a team that is trying to dump salary, if I'm making a trade and I'm on the other end of the phone with the Spurs, Devin Vassell's the first guy I want. Am I willing to part with Devin Vassell to get that all-star? My answer is yes, I am. So bye, Devin. Thanks for your service. Keldon Johnson, same thing. So when you look at some of the star players that and I say star for San Antonio players, all of them not named Wemby can go if we're getting something better in return. And it wouldn't be hard to get something better in return for those guys.
I agree with that idea completely. I mean, the expression that's often used is don't let good be the enemy of great. And you're right. Ever since the fiasco against New Orleans where Devin took the final shot of the game, it felt like that was that was the kind of moment for him where he was like, maybe Wemby should do this. Like maybe I shouldn't be the guy in these moments. And you know,
it was in that moment. But do you remember that photo that leaked out of Spurs practice right after the All-Star break? It was like a PowerPoint,
rules or the creed or whatever.
Yeah. And it was know your role. And I just felt like, my goodness, this is all about Devin Vassell. It applies to everybody. But Devin, if you follow these, we'll be pretty good. And if you look at the way the Spurs played down the stretch, especially Devin Vassell, and Devin Vassell played as if he wants to be back and played for his job, and he's earned it. At the same time, if the Spurs need to part ways with Devin in a trade to get a all-star in return, then that's what's going to have to happen. And again, this roster down the stretch, they were fun to watch. They were fun to watch when games didn't matter. When it didn't matter anymore, it was fun to watch. And those wins down the stretch, while glorious, they took you out of the top 3 in the lottery. So your chances of getting another number 1 overall pick or whatever went from like 14% to 10%. But which doesn't really matter. Well, it does. But but they were fun to watch. They made a lot of Spurs fans that at least interact with the Blitz say, well, man, we can't get rid of Devin now. We can't get rid of Keldon now. Yeah, yes, you can. If you want to be better, you want to be in the play-in next year or the actual playoffs, some of those guys might have to go because there are better players out there that might be better fits with Victor.
You have to make decisions when you're not emotionally compromised. And you're right. The Wemby-less win against Phoenix, the win over the Knicks, the win over the Nuggets, all those fun times down the stretch, getting past 20, taking yourselves out of the history books for all the wrong reasons. Those were all great times. We all high-fived. We all cheersed. We, town and honk our horns or get free coffee or anything like that. But it was fun, and we'll always have those memories. But we're now emotionally compromised. The way we felt prior to all that stuff was anybody not named Wemby is completely and totally accessible. You want to call us up? You want to hit our phone up? You want anybody on this roster not named Wemby? Fine, let's talk. Like you haven't said those words explicitly, so I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it seems like you agree. Like, I know some people would say, no, I want to keep Devin. Why? And I don't say that as any kind of slight against Devin. Like, the point is, you're still working this roster over. There should be nothing you're not willing to do, except for obviously move Wemby.
Exactly. And I've said it on the Blitz, and I'll be clear here on the Morning Huddle. The idea of anybody guaranteeing themselves, the only untouchable is Wemby. Everybody else can go.
Has a price.
I'm not saying that I want to get rid of everybody else, but if
Right.
I've got to part ways with some of those guys, then they're gone. I would say number 2 on the list, if I were to create an untouchable list in order, right? It's Wemby, and he's on there.
Right.
I really think Trae Jones will be a fantastic backup point guard for the Spurs. I love his basketball IQ, how he worked with Wemby. You saw Wemby's game drastically improve when he took over as point guard. Now, is that because Trae Jones is that good, or because Jeremy Sohan experiment at point guard was that bad? And I think there's a combination there, but I think Trae Jones and what he offers, he'll be a great backup to whoever comes in. So I would say it might be harder to part ways with him than Devin.
Yeah. The value he represents for his spot on the team it feels large, like a larger potential return on investment for what you have to do, from like how many minutes you have to give him and things like that. And it does feel safe. It feels like, well, nobody's going to ask for Trae Jones. You know what I'm saying? Like they'll ask for Devin, and we've already made our peace with that. I like this question in the Brigade Bar from Money Paradox. Is, would any of these all-star players want to come over and take a step back because it's Wemby's team? We'll call that the Devin Vassell experience, so to speak. I think that as it relates to, let's just use Trae Young as an example. Trae's been through it, man. Like I think for some people, some players, it's probably a breath of fresh air to go somewhere and have some help. You know, Trae Young, I don't think would be upset about the idea of coming to San Antonio and having somebody to kind of take a big chunk off of his plate, and he can just be free and play in a way that he hasn't been able to in a very long time.
I think there are certain players that would not want to take that role. I think there are others that understand it takes 2 or 3 to win. If a Kevin Durant can go into Golden State with an established Steph Curry and an established Draymond Green and Klay Thompson and go win some titles. Now, granted, that didn't last very long. I get that. You look at Anthony Davis going over to the Lakers with LeBron. There are a lot of examples out there where superstars have come together and they've made it work. I think when you get on the playground, you understand who is the guy and you understand your role, and you got to check your ego at the door. And we know one of the things that you have to do to play for the Spurs, listen to Greg Popovich, you've got to be over yourself. You know, I think there are guys out there that if the Spurs are talking to them, they're going to be over themselves. If you're not, it's not going to work. And I kind of bring that back to what, the strategically aggressive. They're going to go make deals with guys that are going to be good fits, not just the first call that comes in or maybe the biggest name. So I think that is something that would evaluate. Are there some guys, to answer the question, that wouldn't want to come here because of that? Yeah, probably. But hell, before Wemby's rookie season, all the reports were that Dame was interested in coming to San Antonio to play with Wemby. We're talking about a Dame Lillard who at one point in his career had problems getting along with LaMarcus Aldridge.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, granted, this is from an opposition standpoint, but any story, any think piece that's been done this season about Wemby that's involved player quotes, from teams that the Spurs played whenever it happened was always words of extreme admiration and extreme just like shock and awe, extreme like, man, this is crazy. Like this league's going to be his. Like, I don't know how you wouldn't want a piece of that. And I think as players age and they experience more and more disappointment, it becomes easier and easier to accept whatever you want to call this, like a lesser role, a smaller role, a diminished role. But the good news, if you're looking for those, is there's a lot more of those dudes than there are, and want the stage all to themselves.
Well, and I think also as some of those players get a little bit older and they've got a lot left in the gas tank, they realize at this point in their careers, if they don't have one, how difficult it is to win an NBA championship. And staying with Dame Lillard, who all the reports said he was interested last year in coming to San Antonio, and I thought that would have been awesome. He ends up in Milwaukee. I mean, you got Giannis, you're taking the back seat there. Dame's willing to do that. Thought he was going to a team that had a chance to compete for a championship. And hell, they still might. Although the way this team has played since they brought in Doc Rivers, I don't know. I mean, you look at the teams in the East, and who do you trust? But to that point, guys will take that step back in a lesser role because it is Wemby.
Last night or yesterday on the show, I told Rob, I said, there's some incentive for us to root for Chicago here, right? To get Trae Young, get his season done with as soon as possible, right? And that was kind of a funny joke. But in a different way, do you think there's even the most remote incentive towards rooting for the Bucks so that Project Dame can be proven to be fruitful, right? So that if you're in that situation yourself in your own version of Portland, I mean, to look at, especially with, Milwaukee's regarded as a flyover town, whatever, small market, blah, 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 to look at it and say, hey, there's proof positive here. Look at what Dame just did. Dame joined Giannis. Again, right, the circumstances right now don't lend to that, like at this specific moment. But if it works out for Dame and the Bucks, I think that opens the door wider if it isn't open enough because of Wemby himself individually.
I think you can spin whatever argument you want, find an example that's going to work for however you're going to try to spin that or not. Maybe. I mean, the idea of improving the roster, and when you look at what Wemby did this year, Wemby's, the idea 3 months ago that he would be in the legit conversation for Defensive Player of the Year as a rookie. I mean, Rookie of the Year is easy. And I've maintained, I don't know that if I had a vote that I would vote for Wemby for Defensive Player of the Year, because you look at an award like that, even though it's an individual award, your team sucked. You won 22 games. You don't get a trophy other than Rookie of the Year. But when I see all the people that are putting Wemby on the ballot because it is individual and his play were those wow moments. I mean, we had wow moments this year from Wemby like we used to get on a regular basis from Manu. I still don't think he wins the award, but he might finish second, which I still think is impressive for a guy that played on a team that won 22 games.
I don't think he's Defensive Player of the Year. I think it's a fun and interesting and different kind of argument than most candidates offer on a year-to-year basis. But like I'm not upset that he's like, there are some people who are like rioting in the streets. Like, how could you not give him Defensive Player of the Year? It makes sense.
I mean, your team won 22 games, and I think go win a bunch of them, because then it's going to end up being like, LeBron could have been MVP 10 years in a row. Kobe, right. MVP. So who's the MVP not named, or the Defensive Player of the Year not named Wemby? Because we're going to get to that point. He deserves to be in the conversation for sure. He might deserve to win it. He's not going to win it because the Spurs sucked this year.